Nothing is your inherent stuff, I'm not so much, but.
Hi.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was planning on going with this, but I'm starting a new job. So I'm not going to be able to.
The same address and say, take my name off the list.
Okay. Well, I hadn't fully signed up yet.
Oh.
What I was wondering is, can I write something up and send it to you
Absolutely.
guys?
Yeah, well, it'd be better to just mail it. You know, we're not going to hand deliver, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it'd be better to just write it and say, hey, I wanted to be there, but I can't. This is still what I want you to know. Okay? Yeah, definitely do that.
$2 minutes.
How much is the bus? Free.
It is? Yeah, 5:30.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Hi, Shaun.
Candace.
Nice to meet you,
Very
Candace.
nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming.
I'm really sorry.
Don't worry, we're about to get started. You're good. You're good. Where's Heather? Oh, okay.
Blaze guys.
Get it out first.
This is not about.
Yes.
Okay, so this is our camera.
Excellent.
So there's a camera. No, I mean, it's not going to be able to put a lot on your face. It's just too much. So if you were actually, I'll take a look. If that was showing on your face, it'd be. So that's okay. That's okay. We can work with that.
Do you want more light in here to make it nice?
Yeah. Could we do that?
Yeah, those lights go to regular, just white.
Okay.
Or these do.
All right, Shaun, I got the food right here. Let me know if there's anything else I can for you.
Yeah. Can we turn the lights on?
Thank you.
How well we'll be able to see the screen though. All right, how's it going, everybody?
Good.
My name is Shaun McAlister. I'm the Executive Director of DFW NORML. I'd like to welcome you all to the January meeting, the first meeting of 2017. Please give yourselves a hand for participating in your own freedom. Today, the focus of our meeting, as you may or may not know, is legislative training. We are in the beginning stages of the most important legislative session in Texas marijuana policy history, if you did not know that already. And this today is meant to get as many of us here in North Texas ready for a disco, apparently. Get as many of us ready as possible for the trip to Austin on Citizen Lobby Day, which is February 8th, if you don't know that already. That is the day to mark the calendars for. It will be an intense day of lobbying at the Capitol. Last time we did this, we had around 300 activists from all over the state of Texas. And hopefully this year we have even more because we're far closer to reform in Texas now than we were in 2015. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
All right, well, so Heather Fazio, she's going to be our guest speaker today. I'm going to introduce her after we get a couple of housekeeping elements out of the way. First, did anybody attend our fundraising event, Chronica, earlier in this month? Make some noise if you may attended Chronica. This is our fifth time hosting this event. We actually had it here at Al-Amir. Thank you, Al-Amir, for hosting us once again. Everybody give Al-Amir a hand. Like I said, it's the fifth time we did this event, and it was by far our most successful. We had an amazing turnout. We literally had a line out the door down the building, and we raised approximately $1,800 at this event, which is enough for a bus. One event, we raised enough for a bus. That's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can clap for that, right? We actually made around $1,700, $1,780. Is that what it was, Jessica?
Yes.
And Jessica donated the difference so we could hit that $1,800. So thank you, Jessica. And if there's enough interest, we will get a second bus. There's enough money for us to get a second bus. Right now, we only have 30 people RSVP for the bus trip. We're not going to talk about having another bus until we have 50 people RSVP. Does anybody here right now think that they want to RSVP that isn't already to ride the bus trip? Raise your hand. Good. All right, 2 to 3 people. All right, excellent. Hopefully by the end of this, 4 of you who are wanting to ride the bus down with me and the rest of us, because it's going to be an interesting day to say the least. But Chronica is an excellent event, very well attended. Like I said, we gave away tons and tons of raffle items. I felt like we had a lot of people who came for their first event to Chronica and were blown away by the turnout, by the friendliness of our crowd, and that's really what I want us to be all about, is us building a culture for cannabis, and not just a culture of getting away with it, but a culture of changing the laws and making the state better for all of us. Does that sound good to all of you?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, up next, I'd like to introduce a couple of people who are board members who are going to give some departmental updates really quick. Normally, right here, I would introduce Adam Hess, our Deputy Director. Some of you may or may not know, Adam Hess has decided to resign from the position of Deputy Director for personal reasons, so that position is currently vacant. So in lieu of Deputy Director Adam being here, I'd like to introduce our Interim Director of Finance, Jessica Pallett. Jessica, come on down and say a few words. Everybody say hello to Jessica. Right here, back here.
Okay, so financially, Shaun touched on it just a bit. We did raise $1,800 from Chronica, which is good. We have actually booked the bus that we are expensing from that $1,800. The bank balance is not that great. We're not an organization that has $10,000. We're going to have one more fundraiser push. We're going to send an email, try to get the money for the second bus, but like Shaun said, and I'll reiterate, we won't look to book that second bus until we get a little bit more RSVPs for that. As far as finance, a bus is about $1,800. Indeed. And other than that, I have no more financial business. Thanks, Shaun.
Thanks, Jessica. Got that Toastmaster training. Shake the hand every time you come up. Okay, up next, Nicolette, why don't you come on down? Tell everybody what it's been like getting all these email addresses, how many people we have currently for this trip, all that good stuff.
Okay, so like he said, we have about 30 people RSVP. Really it's 31, but I do say if you're here and you've already RSVP, because I'm missing some information from a lot of people. So if you can get a list updated right now, it would be awesome. Otherwise, we'll be reaching out with the rest of the information. Watch what it says up on this button, but you know.
Board members, do we have any other business that I need to discuss before we can turn it over to Heather? Nobody? Anybody? Wonderful. Eric, hey, Eric decided to show up to a normal meeting. Hey, everybody, just give it up for Eric. This is our secretary. Eric, do you have any announcements? Come on down here if you have some announcements, Eric. Everybody, this is my best friend and roommate and personal trainer and the guru of all good things, Eric Espinoza. Please give him a hand. Speak up.
How y'all doing?
Good.
Well.
So we've had a really great start to our year. Each time we have a big event, we're adding anywhere from 15 to 30 new members, which is pretty damn impressive. We have about 45% of our whole member base that stays current. That's a pretty good number, I think. But we're looking to make that a little bit better. I would like to see that 75%. Why not? So grab everybody you know. If you know they're an enrollment member or they have an enrollment member and they're not current, let's get them current. Let's get them here. Learning how to lobby. You know, let's bring all of the community with you when you come to learn about what you're passionate about. So we've been doing great. Getting new members. The numbers I see here today, it's fantastic. We're sitting around 3,000 total people that have either been a member or are currently a member now. So those are great, huge numbers. I want to see that grow. I want to see us 10,000 members strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joining us here today, supporting us, even when we're not here and even when we're not lobbying, you're supporting us every day.
Thank you, Eric. Board members, is that it? Any other business? Excellent. All right, now I am very excited for the opportunity to turn this over to Heather Fazio. She is one of the 2 most prominent marijuana activists in the state of Texas. She's been all over the state having meetings just like this, having training sessions just like this, helping plan what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, how we're going to lobby, what the strategy is about Texas marijuana policy. I'm so glad that she's here. Please give your undivided attention and a warm welcome to Heather Fazio of the Marijuana Policy Project.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Shaun. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all. Some friendly faces, familiar faces, and a lot of new faces, which is great. I love coming up here, and on a beautiful day in DFW. Thank you for being here today. We did a training recently here in Arlington. It was a longer training, so about 4 hours. So today we're going to be consolidating that to talk about the different organizations we're working with, the policies that are on the books, the kinds of policies that are on the table for discussion, and how we're going to advance marijuana law in Texas. So I'm pleased to be working with the coalition of organizations. As Shaun mentioned, I work for the Marijuana Policy Project, which is a national nonprofit. I'm focused explicitly on Texas policy, but we're working with 25 to 27 different organizations throughout the state. And this brings together some folks that are kind of the usual suspects, like NORML chapters, the more conservative organizations like the Republican Liberty Caucus, the 10th Amendment Center, which is a states' rights organization. We have Republicans against marijuana prohibition. In fact, they've been one of our most critical allies, considering the work they're doing at the Capitol and the work they did during the convention process last year to include in the platform for the Republican Party of Texas a plank that advocates for medical cannabis in Texas. So let me just reiterate that the official position of the Republican Party of Texas, thanks to advocates working on this, is advocating for standing and allowing doctors to decide who should have access rather than the legislature. That is significant progress. A few of which Cordova's here, and it's a thrill to be working with them. Yes, thank you for your work. Jacob, starting with the precinct convention, working his way up, all the way to the state convention, working with the committees there in order to ensure that plank was in the platform. So working together is how we are going to advance this policy, finding issues that we agree on. We know that in this political climate, there is division everywhere and animosity everywhere, but there is more that unites us in this state and in our communities than divides us. And when we can focus on those issues, we're going to be able to succeed in passing meaningful policy changes, not just with marijuana law reform, but whatever issue is important to you. And it's worth noting that while we're talking explicitly about marijuana policy reform today, some of the stuff that we're talking about as far as meeting with lawmakers, how to schedule a meeting, staying on message, all of those things translate to whatever issue is important to you, because this is how we change laws in Texas, is by working through our lawmakers. Many other states have initiatives where the citizens can collect signatures, put a question on the ballot, rally their neighbors, and get out there and change it through the ballot box. Unfortunately, in Texas, we have to work through our lawmakers at the Capitol in order to pass statewide policy. And so that's what we're working on doing. These are some of the organizations that we're working with, constitutional Republican groups. We have Students for Sensible Drug Policy, DFW there, prominently featured, as you'll notice. As criminal justice organizations, social justice organizations that have been working on this stuff for a long time. You know, we have people that are interested in this for the social justice reasons, like the school to prison pipeline, the institutionalized racism that we have seen as a result of these failed policies, mass incarceration. But we see more conservatives coming in also to talk about how we're wasting so much money, how this is a matter of personal responsibility and individual liberty. With the liberty movement rising in Texas, including within the Republican Party, more people resonate with those kinds of arguments and are able to understand how reforming marijuana policies is something that makes sense for Texas and for liberty. So we are working with this transpartisan group, is a term I like to use, because we transcend party lines when we talk about the issue on its own merits. And we have two priorities for the most part. While many of our coalition partners want to see marijuana regulated similarly to alcohol, which we now see in 8 states throughout the U.S. 1 in 5 Americans now living in a state that regulates marijuana like alcohol. Many of our coalition partners want to see that here in Texas, but others are just in favor of reducing penalties for low-level possession or allowing patients safe and legal access. And we want to work with them as long as we can in order to enact meaningful changes. The citizens of Texas are largely in favor of reform at one level or another, whether it's reducing penalties or mostly, we see 76% listed here in favor of patients having safe and legal access. And you'll notice that the black scar on our poll here are those who support the status quo, which is a tiny a fraction of those. Everything in red is in favor of one kind of reform or another. It's a thrill to see so many people in this state in favor of this kind of reform, and what we need to do is help to give them the tools that they need to communicate with lawmakers. We have representative government. The lawmakers represent those who show up, and when the people showing up are just bureaucrats and lobbyists, that's who they're going to be representing. Until the people start showing up, that's when we can start affecting real change, and that's what we're doing, and that's why we're seeing success now with this movement for marijuana law reform. The legislative session last year was a historic one. The legislature meets for 140 days every 2 years, which means that it is a short period of time every 2 years that we have to change laws. If you're into limited government like I am, that's a good thing. They only have 140 days to pass laws. However, it means that we only have 140 days to repeal bad law. And there is a lot of bad law on the books, including current marijuana policies, and including the compassionate use program that passed last year, which we'll talk a little bit about, in desperate need of reform. So we had an unprecedented number of bills introduced last session, about a dozen marijuana or cannabis related bills. We already have this session about 10 that have been introduced, ranging from decriminalizing small amounts to medical access we have legalization is a proposal that would put it on the ballot, and we'll talk a little bit about those resolutions, the good, the bad, and the ugly about the proposals that we have introduced so far this session. But last legislative session, we saw a span also. So we saw David Simpson introduce a bill, Representative Simpson, a bill that would have repealed marijuana prohibition entirely. That bill made it out of committee last session, which was tremendous. In fact, it made it out of committee with a better vote than our decriminalization bill, which was very surprising, mostly just because of who was present at the time the vote was taken. But nonetheless, it was 4-2 versus 5-2 for repealing marijuana prohibition out of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee in the House, which was really great. We had the civil penalties bill introduced last session for the first time, which is something we're going to be supporting again this session, and we already are. It makes low-level possession a civil offense. It'll be handled administratively rather than criminally, which helps to avoid the criminal record associated with even a tiny amount of marijuana. And then we saw the introduction, the passage of the Compassionate Use Act. And, there's a lot of negative to say about it because it is so exclusive. It's leaving behind patients throughout the state of Texas. However, it's important to note that the passage of this signified the acknowledgement by the state of Texas that cannabis is medicine. This is something that they have been denying for decades and now have acknowledged that it is in fact medicine. It does in fact help patients, but they have narrowed it in scope to where it is only for those with intractable epilepsy, and it's only low THC cannabis. And as most of us know, it is whole plant access that helps patients thrive when they use this as medicine for whatever condition it is that their doctors think that it can help with. So I mentioned that it is only intractable epilepsy, it's only low THC cannabis. But what it does do, let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts of this program before we talk about how we're going to improve it with Senator Menendez Bill 269. It lays the foundation for cultivation, for processing, and for dispensing within the state of Texas. It's going to have licensed business owners growing cannabis in the state of Texas later this year. That is very significant. We have the Department of Public Safety, which wouldn't have been the agency that I chose to regulate a medical program. Nonetheless, that is who's regulating it. They did a really good job at first, and then they proposed some outrageous amendments, which some of y'all may have heard about with regard to the regulation. making the application fee and the first 2 years of licensing $1.3 million for a program that only affects those with intractable epilepsy. So we fought back on that. Many of you probably contacted your legislators, contacted the governor, contacted the department, and we were able to scale that back to where the licensing fees are still higher than anywhere else in the country, but they did roll it back significantly. And it just reiterated to me the power that we have when we get involved in the process and help to articulate the kinds of policy changes that we want to see, whether it's through the statutes and through the legislature or through the Department of Public Safety with the regulations. And it also reminds us that we have to be eternally vigilant. Even in Colorado, where they, the motherland, where they legalized it in 2012, they are still having to make sure that the regulatory agencies are doing things properly, that they're not violating the protections that need to be in place for patients, and making sure that really the prohibitionists don't claw their way back, because they are still spewing their nonsense and misinformation that they've been doing for years, and they're continuing at it. So we have to remain vigilant. And we're going to have to do so in Texas for a long time. We're going to have to make sure we keep doing that. There's one critical problem that has to change in this bill in order to make it even a functioning program for those it was intended to help. And that is the language that requires doctors to prescribe cannabis. Doctors cannot prescribe a Schedule I drug. In the 28 states that have functioning medical marijuana programs, doctors recommend cannabis. And they certify patients, which is a formal process. This is legal semantics, and that gets annoying and frustrating, but it is very important to make sure that doctors have the protections they need to move forward with getting this medicine to their patients. So we have to change that language. We want to make this program more inclusive for patients. So what that means is making the list of qualifying conditions more robust. We want to see our program on par with the programs that we see throughout the country. If a condition is qualified in another state, it should be qualified here in Texas. And in addition to adding a list of qualifying conditions, we're adding a mechanism that requires DPS to meet twice a year with a panel of physicians and patients that would decide if another condition should be added as a qualifier. This would allow us to have twice a year, we have the opportunity to add conditions rather than every other year and going through this grueling legislative process. And that's written into Senator Menendez's Senate Bill 269, which is a comprehensive medical marijuana program. If the compassionate use program is on a scale from 1 to 10, it's arguably a 2 or a 3, we want to take it to a 10, and that's what Senator Menendez is doing with his proposal. It's also only low THC cannabis, as I mentioned. THC is a very therapeutic component of the plant, especially when we're talking about pain, Alzheimer's, PTSD, and other anxiety disorders. So we want to see that it's capped at 0.5% right now, which is like nothing. It's basically what you can get from Walmart, the CBD oil you can get from Walmart right now, which is arguably legal or not, but you can order it and it can be delivered to your house. But it's just barely better than that, right, that we already have access to. So we're going to remove that cap with this bill to allow doctors and patients to decide and work with their bodies and their conditions to find out which strains and which levels of the different cannabinoids are going to be best for their condition. Another thing that's missing out of the compassionate use program is the allowance for independent laboratories. I mentioned earlier that we have the licensing mechanism for dispensaries, for cultivators and for manufacturers, but we're missing independent labs. The only way currently that products would be tested is for a company to test their own products. We know how that would go. And then, or DPS to test these products in an enforcement mechanism. And so what we want to see is independent businesses be able to operate labs to be able to test products and give their stamps of approval and independent study of whatever these products are for consumer protection. It's critically important. Additionally, something that's very important to the patient population is the ability to grow a few of their own plants. This would be in a secure location. It would be regulated. However, it is something that's important. We have a veteran that's incredibly active, Ramona Harding, who I think many of us know and love. She is a veteran who suffers from PTSD, and she has for years. She's from a state where marijuana is legal for medical purposes. In fact, now it's legal. She's from California, so now it's legal for recreational purposes too. But her VA doctor recommended cannabis for her PTSD and recommended that she grow cannabis because gardening is very therapeutic. And taking that holistic approach and growing your own medicine was really therapeutic for her. And so we want to be able to make sure that patients have the ability to do that as well. Not to mention the fact that it can be rather expensive to buy this medicine from dispensaries, and so we want to be able to use your own, your own tools to grow your own medicine. And then of course we have to change that problematic prescription language. This is Senator Jose Menendez. He is from San Antonio. He introduced a comprehensive medical marijuana bill last session as well. And he was also a co-author of the Compassionate Use Act. And he hasn't stopped working. Senator Menendez and Representative Moody, who I'll mention in just a minute, these are the kinds of legislators that we want championing our issue. Because not only did they introduce it, but they are fighting for it. They're working with their colleagues, trying to bring them on board, finding ways that they can work together, and really taking on this issue. Senator Menendez knows that this is the right kind of policy that we need to have on the books, and he's fighting hard for it. And so I am very pleased to be working for him and incredibly grateful for the work that he's doing. Senator Menendez. So we have some pretty harsh penalties on the books here in Texas. Even for tiny amounts of marijuana, you face up to 6 months in jail, $2,000 in fines. And what's worse, though, is the collateral consequences that come along with a conviction, even for a tiny amount. If you're convicted of a drug arrest or a drug charge, you have hindered access to education, to employment, to housing. Your driver's license is automatically suspended. Whether or not you were in, near, or around a vehicle at the time of your arrest, it's automatically suspended. And that has to do with federal laws and transportation dollars. Those strings, in order for us to get our money back from the feds, we have to comply with some of these policies. And that's how this has been enacted for so long. In order to circumvent that, though, we have a proposal that Representative Moody introduced. Before I get into that bill, though, these penalties I'm not going to go through all of these. If anybody here wants a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, I'm happy to send it. My cards are on all the tables. Email me and I'll send it over to you so you have this. But I wanted to point out two particular things with regard to the current penalties on the books. Low-level possession is 6 months in jail, $2,000 in fines, and a criminal record. And concentrates are something that we have to make sure that we acknowledge and know what the penalties are in Texas, because they are so commonly used in other states. With all the edible products, oils that are used, they're excellent, right? They're great products. They're fantastic for patients because smoking cannabis is not good for anyone. Shouldn't be criminalized, but isn't good for anyone. So we've seen the innovation because of the entrepreneurship going on. When this market is brought into the light of day, instead of being run by criminals in the underground, it is brought into the light of day where we're able to see the innovation in these kinds of products. But in Texas, as soon as you cross that imaginary line from one state to another, it is a felony in Texas to have a drop of oil in a vaporizer, to have a single gummy bear left in your suitcase from your vacation in Colorado. And people are being charged with felonies in Texas. So we have to make sure that we're aware of this. I want to make sure that everybody understands we're all adults, we can take our own risks, but you need to know that the Texas law enforcement takes this very seriously. And so concentrates and edible products and all of that will be included in the medical program, as well as flour, which is not included currently. That was one thing, I should update this and add that currently with the Compassionate Use Program, you can't have the flour itself. It's only edible products and manufactured products, but we would change that with our program. So we have harsh penalties on the books for even low amounts of marijuana. Representative Joe Moody is a former prosecutor out of El Paso, and he introduced a bill last session for the first time that would have instituted a civil penalty. It made it out of committee, like I mentioned, but didn't make it any further because of the time constraint that we are under. We want to hit the ground running again, pick the ball up right where we left it off, and carry that across the finish line this legislative session. And what that bill will do, this time it's House Bill 81. There's an identical bill in the Senate by Senator Rodriguez. It's Senate Bill 170. These bills are identical, and what they would do is eliminate the arrest, the jail time, and most importantly, the criminal record currently associated with 1 ounce or less of marijuana in Texas. So these folks, if you, it would be handled administratively. You would get a ticket. That would be all. You pay your ticket and that's it. If you want to contest it, you go to your Justice of the Peace Court, you contest it there, you can have a jury if you want. At the end of the day, the only thing that really changes in the process, like with a speeding ticket, you can either pay it and you'd be done, and there's no record, there's no criminal record of it, or you can go through the process, and if you are in fact convicted of it, it's still just a fine. You'd have to pay all the court costs as well for doing that, if you're convicted, but you wouldn't have that criminal record. And that's really important because we're saddling, especially our young people, with criminal records. They're getting kicked out of school, losing their financial aid, unable to get occupational licenses, and driver's license suspension often ends up with a cycle of abuse, which is why a lot of people are talking about eliminating that provision entirely, not just for criminal drug charges. Yes, ma'am.
What was the House bill?
House Bill 81 and Senate Bill 170, and then the medical bill is Senate Bill 269. So on here, they are on the screen now.
Is anybody in the House putting in anything that only coincides with the Senate Bill 269 yet?
We will be having that happen. We're holding out for a Republican. We have Democrats that are willing and able. We can almost always rely on our Democratic allies to support this kind of policy. But obviously in a conservative state, having a conservative leader on the issue is going to be really important. So we're working on courting some Republicans and talking about that, but we are looking forward to having a companion bill or something very similar in the House for consideration. Any other questions while we're on a little pause here? Okay, so top 2 priorities for this legislative session, which ends at the end of May. Reducing penalties for low-level possession so that there's no arrest and no jail and no criminal record, and then making the compassionate use program more inclusive. That means adding conditions for the patients that are suffering from things like Crohn's disease, PTSD, cancer, chronic pain. My God, can we help get people off of opiates? Addiction and disease is so prevalent. We're seeing in states that have access to medical marijuana, opiate overdose deaths are down 25 to 33%. That is significant life savings just by changing the policy and allowing people to make their own decisions. It's not even covered by insurance. People are going into their own pocket because they know they want to get off of this cycle of abuse that opiates cause. So it's incredibly important to get chronic and severe pain included as a qualifying condition. We're going to lift the cap on THC. We're going to amend the language so that doctors would recommend cannabis and certify patients so that they are given the confidence they need and are protected from the DEA, which could withdraw their registration and not let them make prescriptions for any other patients. And we're going to add independent laboratories and then, of course, allow the patients and their caregivers to grow plants of their own. Any questions about those policies before we move on to the other policies that have been introduced and then the process? Okay. So we have seen, like I mentioned, almost a dozen. I think there's 10 different marijuana-related bills, aside from the ones that would require drug testing for public assistance, which is something that's of interest to a lot of people, but we don't have it listed here. We have a bill that was 2 of these actually, House Bill 82 and House Bill 680 were both introduced last legislative session by the same authors. Representative Dutton introduced a bill that would make it so it's a Class C misdemeanor rather than a Class B misdemeanor for up to an ounce. And Representative Wu, both of these guys from Harris County, will introduce one that would do less. At 0.35 ounces would be a Class C misdemeanor. Now, this represents a positive step, I suppose, in that it would eliminate the arrest and it would eliminate the jail time. It would bring down the fine to $500. The significant problem, though, with this, which is why the civil penalties proposal is the superior proposal, is because people would still be left with a criminal conviction. And with the fine being $500, people are going to pay their fine, take their conviction, and have a criminal record. And with it being a Class C misdemeanor, they do not have a right to counsel, which means they're likely to not have someone tell them that this is setting them up for a lifetime of harm just by paying their ticket. So I appreciate the authors of these bills, but Senate Bill 170 and House Bill 81 are better proposals because it avoids that criminal record, which is a life sentence when you are convicted. You cannot get convictions expunged. You can get arrests expunged and deferrals expunged, but once you're convicted, only the governor can save you. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that that's very likely these days. Although he is moving along on this issue, which is great. And then finally, we have House Bill 58, which would create a first-time offender program, or at least allow counties to do this. This was introduced by a Republican, Representative White. He introduced this bill on the very first day of the pre-filing period, which was great. It demonstrated that he is interested in doing something relating to marijuana law reform. Unfortunately, this program is something that can already be done. We're already seeing it being done in Harris County. It's utilizing the discretion that the DA already has. So this bill doesn't do a whole lot. So we want to make sure that we're acknowledging him and thanking him as a conservative for trying to do something, but we want to bring him along on something that's going to have a little bit more meat to it. And I'd love to get him signed on as a co-author of House Bill 81. So if there happens to be anyone from Representative White's district, please do communicate with him about the necessity for having a different kind of policy enacted. There's one bill related to the Compassionate Use Act that is really just a clarifying bill. In the Compassionate Use Act, it said that localities cannot prohibit cannabis businesses, which is good. That means that patients throughout the state are going to be able to get access to their medicine. And what we expected was that they'd be able to zone, right? Cities would be able to zone for these businesses just like they do with every other business. All this bill does is clarify that they can do zoning, but they still cannot prohibit. Well, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's important, number one, because it's relating to our issue. But number two, it's important for us, again, to be vigilant, because this bill could be amended to be very bad or very good. But it's a vehicle related to the Compassionate Use Act, so we need to keep an eye on the legislation like this to make sure that we're making sure that they don't tack on any amendments that make the program worse than it already is. And then we have the resolutions that have been introduced. So, as many of you know, we cannot collect signatures and place a question on the ballot in Texas. Other states can, we cannot. We can do it at the local level. We can't change drug laws. The legislature explicitly forbids that. But if you're ever signing a petition for a local ordinance, that makes sense at the local level, but it won't be for the state level. So the only way to put a question on the ballot for the citizens of Texas is by way of constitutional amendment. And that has to happen through the legislature. So we have 3 different resolutions here, 2 of which are identical. And both would allow, these 2 would allow for, it's basically a legalization resolution, to put it on the ballot for citizens to decide. The second one is relating to medical marijuana. So I look at these 2 proposals a little bit differently. The first one, legalization isn't a top priority for us here in Texas right now. We have so much work to do between now and when we're at a point when that's reasonable. But this allows for the conversation to happen. Much like David Simpson's bill, it was so far that it made me look moderate. Love that. And it brought us further on the discussion. And that's what this is going to do as well. So we can talk about how prohibition has utterly failed by every measure and is causing far more harm to our communities than marijuana itself ever could. That allows us to have that conversation. But the referendum for medical marijuana is concerning to me because it would put the question on the ballot in 2018. The election would happen, and it's not a, this resolution doesn't outline what the program would be. It wouldn't go into effect on the day after the election. It would instruct the legislature to pass a program, and it's wide open for them. There is no certain requirement for the deadline they have to get it done. There are no secure patient protections in it, and if they do that, it means that it may not be into effect until 2020. So if we're supporting this in lieu of Senate Bill 269, it means that we're stalling patient access. It also, and not to say, I don't want to totally discourage people from thinking about this, but if you are considering supporting one of these resolutions, you should think about how you divvy up your time. 1/3 should be advocating and 2/3 should be fundraising, because it's going to cost a lot of money to run a campaign in Texas. Not to say that you should minimize your advocacy for it. It just means that you need to double your efforts on fundraising, because it's going to take a lot to pass an effort like this in Texas, and that's just to get people out to vote. because it is a huge state of Texas, and fear mobilizes people. We've seen how fear has it's really propped up these terrible policies for so long because they keep people terrified. They keep reiterating these fallacies, the nonsense, that the gateway theory, right? Cannabis today, heroin tomorrow, right? That's what they keep saying. And I tell you what, they're at the Capitol talking about that now. So we have to overcome that. And we're going to talk a little bit about overcoming some of the fallacies and the myths that we see reiterated over and over again by prohibitionists. Any questions about these resolutions or any of the other proposals that have been introduced? All right, pretty good. So as a grassroots movement, constituent advocacy is the most critical tool that we have. People getting in, talking with legislators, talking with community leaders, and bringing them the facts and the evidence, which are on our side when it comes to reform. So getting in there and having those conversations. Shaun mentioned Advocacy Day, which is going to be on February 8th. If you haven't already marked your calendar, please do so. DFW NORML, as we all heard, is going to be chartering a bus. It's going to take you very early in the morning all the way to the Capitol. We're going to have a great day at the Capitol with a brief training and briefing on the different policies that we're advocating for. We're going to break up into teams by district, so you'll be working with those that live in your area. We're going to go to our legislator's office. We're going to have a social afterwards so we can decompress a little bit, maybe give a little bit of feedback of the things that you learned. So when you're visiting with lawmakers, let us know the feedback that you're getting. So we need to know how they're feeling, what concerns they have, how we can overcome that. And then you guys will be headed up after the social. So it's going to be a very long day. But that's the kind of commitment that we need to pass meaningful legislation. It's long days like that when we have hearings also. When the bill is considered by a committee, you can expect a 12-hour day. Bring a sweater, bring snacks, maybe a pillow. You might need it because it's going to be a long day. And especially when we're talking about medical cannabis, we have patient warriors at the Capitol who are just pounding through these hours, getting there, giving their testimony, and they have to wait. And so it takes serious dedication. But we only have 140 days, so we have to jam it all in, be dedicated, power through, and then hopefully see success on the other side of that. So let's talk about the legislative timeline a little bit. The session began on January 10th. That's when the clock started ticking, 140 days. And it ends at the end of May. As you'll see here, May 29th, the last day of the legislative session. We're planning on doing educational exhibits. We're going to do 2 weeks, 2 separate weeks, one focused on civil penalties and prohibition generally being a failure, and one focused on medical marijuana. This, and as we're going to talk about, is because messaging is important. When you go in and you're talking with someone, we get passionate and there's so much to talk about, but we have to stay focused on whatever the issue is that we're talking about that day. So if you go in to talk about medical cannabis, it's important to stay on track and talk about that legislation. Because if you start talking about the criminal justice side of things, it's going to convolute the message, and it's going to be hard for your audience, the legislator or their staff, to receive that information. So we're going to do 2 educational exhibits. We're printing up large posters that have different facts and statistics, different stories, quotes from law enforcement or medical professionals, helping to draw attention to this issue and put it on display. And we're going to be doing legislative briefings, inviting legislators and their staff at the Capitol to a panel where they'll be briefed on the issue at large, the policies that are on the table, and where we want to go with the policy changes. Have Constituent Advocacy Day is on February 8th, like we mentioned. One thing that's not on here, but it just got finalized, is Veterans Lobby Day, February 22nd. If you're a veteran, February 22nd is the day that you want to be at the Capitol. In addition to the 8th, if you can make 2 trips. David Bass is the Director of Veteran Outreach for Texas NORML, and he's been heading up this effort and is leading the charge. He's done an outstanding job, and veterans are really leading on this issue. You know, I tell you, when a veteran walks into a legislative office, they are listening to what you have to say. They're tremendous advocates, and we're thrilled to have them on board. The last date of file a bill is mid-March, and you'll see a big gap between March 13th and March 28th, and that's because there's going to be a whole lot of moving parts. We don't know exactly when our hearings are going to be. We get 5 days notice for hearings, so if you are wanting to submit testimony to the committee members, it's important to do that now. We're going to talk about crafting a testimonial in just a minute. But doing that in advance, because like I said, we get 5 days notice to get to the Capitol or to get that testimony submitted. Any questions about timeline? So meeting with legislators, we have the federal government and the state government, both of which have representatives and senators. So it gets a little confusing. So don't be intimidated by that. Let me clarify just a little bit. At the federal level, we have the House of Representatives and the Senate, the U.S. Senate, Congress, right? That's a federal term. And then we have the House of Representatives and the Senate at the state level. All the policies we're talking about today are about state legislators and our state legislature. So the federal level is important. It's not what we're talking about today, but there are important things that our federal lawmakers do relating to the DEA. Love those guys, right? We warm fuzzy feelings. The DEA, the FDA, the banking regulations, interstate commerce. The lawsuit that we recently saw filed in Colorado relating to CBD, because of the DEA's clarification on it being a Schedule I drug. So there's different moving parts at the federal level, and for that you're going to contact your congressman, and you're going to contact John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. I know.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
I know the feeling. You know, surprisingly, John Cornyn is coming along on criminal justice issues.
Yes,
He is, and it is important to recognize that and praise him when he does good. Well, maybe not for marijuana specifically, but for criminal justice in general, I've been really surprised. And I think it has a lot to do with his staffers. The people that he's been surrounding himself with are more liberty-minded Republicans. And so, you know, we keep on working, right? We got a long-term goal. So at the state level, our legislators meet in Austin every 2 years. And so we're going to be working on changing the penal code, the Texas statutes, changing the Health and Human Services Code, occupational code at the state level. So to find out who your legislators are, I recommend going to Texas Legislature Online. This is a screenshot from that website. You'll notice on the bottom right, there's a square that says, who represents me? That's where you'll enter your address, you click submit, and then you'll get a page that looks like this. That's gonna tell you who your legislators are, what their contact information is, where their offices are, and give you a link to where you can find out more information about them. So you'll see here listed, we have Senator Menendez featured here, but we have, so these are the federal legislators, and then we have your state senator and your state representative. And you'll notice two sets of information here. We have their capital information, their capital office, and then we have their district information. Because every legislator, if they live outside of the Austin area, has district offices so that you don't have to travel all the way to Austin to meet with their staff. So there's local offices here in this area so you don't have to make that drive. Although we do want you to make the drive for Lobby Day because that is about showing them just how many people in Texas are willing to come to the Capitol on a Wednesday to advocate for this kind of policy. Let's talk about general etiquette. And actually, I have a handout on most of the on all the tables. Talking about it's kind of the do's and don'ts. Some of these are basics, and a lot of this is basic, like communication. It's humanizing this issue, and making the legislators understand that this is a real issue that affects real people in their district. So humanizing and putting a face to the issue. So, you want to research the official, you want to research your legislator, find out what kind of things are important to them. If you both went to A&M, you're going to want to bring that up. And you want to know about that in advance so you can bring it up. You'll want to prepare your talking points in advance. What issues do you want to bring up? What statistics do you want to focus on? Or research studies do you want to present to them? And actually that brings me to the other page that's here, which is an advocacy worksheet that helps you to, when you go to this page and you get their information, you can fill that into the boxes so that you have this handy for you. And then you'll notice here we have personal introduction and then 3 points of discussion that you want to make. So your personal introduction is going to be your roots in the community. Why this is an important issue to you. If you have a loved one that suffered through cancer treatment, for example, you're going to want to share that story. If you know someone who was arrested and got kicked out of college because of it, you're going to want to share that story. It's these personal experiences that really make a big difference. And outlining this in advance not only is important so you know what you want to say generally, but if you're like me, I get a little razzled when I get excited. And so it's important to get back on track, right? So you make one point and you have it written down here so you can make your second point and then go on to your third. With the legislative session being already kicked off, you're going to have about 15 or 20 minutes with whoever you're sitting with. So it's going to be a brief period of time. You're going to want to pack in a lot of information, but not too much. So that's why it's important to make sure that you really identify the points that you want to make and have them written down here. Okay, so talking points, you're going to want to bring any facts or handouts that you want to deliver to them, research studies or press releases from different organizations. Like I just visited 2 legislators, and I actually got to meet with the legislators themselves, which was really great, with a constituent from their district. There's a couple, Dan and Debbie. Debbie was diagnosed last year with Alzheimer's, and Dan is super conservative, Republican, oil and gas engineer, never thought he'd be doing any of this. And when she was diagnosed, he was told by the doctors that there is no treatment. There's nothing that's really going to help her. There's some drugs, but really they're more detrimental in the long term. And so he started doing his research because he just wasn't going to take that. You know, it's so sweet that this couple. She's the love of his life, and he is just devastated with this diagnosis. And now, having done the research and seeing that there is a medicine that is helping people, and not just stopping the progression, but actually rolling back the symptoms of the disease and the plaque that develops in the brain. And so he is fired up about this and got to get in there and share this personal story with them. And what he did was he printed up the studies that he found. The most recent one was released right before her diagnosis last June from the Salk Institute, and which is a very reputable a group of people that do research, and it was about how THC in particular is helping to break down the plaque in the brain that causes the fog of Alzheimer's and the forgetfulness. And so he brought that to them, and so it was great because not only did Alzheimer's need to be included, which is what he was supporting, but THC is critical to helping her in her treatment. So he was a great advocate. He and Debbie joined me at the Capitol. We met with their legislators, and it was really productive. So he was prepared with notes. He was prepared with the research. He was prepared with the points that he wanted to make. He was respectful and courteous. You know, sometimes it can get frustrating. You know, sometimes it feels like you're beating your head against the wall. But we are making progress, and it's by being professional, it's by continuing to be courteous and being persistence in this stuff, following through with the research that you're bringing to them directly, but then following up with more. A news article comes out. You've already met with John on staff, so you can follow up with John with an email. Hey, wanted to make sure that you guys saw this article. Little things like that really pull things along, and they put that in their file so that they can make the right decisions when the bill comes up for consideration. Of course, be thankful for their time, express that gratitude, and be prompt in any follow-ups with questions that they have. It's important to do a lot of listening. These guys have concerns that we can overcome oftentimes. And you may not know the answer to their question right away, and it's okay to say, I don't know. It is very okay to say that, and then you want to follow up. Call me. If you have a question that you can't find the answer to, I'll be happy to help you so that you can follow up with those legislators. So before you call to schedule a meeting or to call in favor of a bill or opposed to a bill, there will be bad bills, guaranteed, with 10,000 bills introduced in the legislature. But you want to know who they are, how they voted, maybe review their biography again so you know who they are, and can kind of humanize with whatever issues are important to them. Find out what kind of bills they've authored or co-authored in the past. This will give you an indication of what kinds of things are important to them. So, for example, Senator Nelson up here in this area, she is very involved in education. So if you're meeting with her and you want to talk about House Bill 81 or Senate Bill 170, you're going to maybe want to focus on the kids, right? They always say, what about the children, right? And so what about the children? Well, what about the kids that are getting kicked out of college because they use this substance that we know is safer than alcohol? What about those kids? What about the kids that are being kicked off of campus, even in high school, because of this? It's having serious effects. So bringing it in to an issue that's important to them. Checking out their social media to find out what kinds of things are interested in them, or find out what kind of things they are interested in, and relating to that. It's also important to recognize that Facebook and social media outlets are real life, that they read that their staff reads that, and so you can either be the guy in caps lock and exclamation points going nuts, they're going to remember that, or you can be the guy that they remember because you are providing links to research studies, links to news articles that are important. You can look at it not only for the person you're engaging with, in whatever communication you have with the people that are watching that when it's a public forum. It's important that we're providing valuable research to people that are not necessarily in our bubble, right? We read news headlines a little differently than other people because this is something we're passionate about. We see these things because our friends are sharing them all the time, but they're not seeing them all the time. So we have to introduce this kind of thing to them, and we want to do it in a respectful and a professional way so that they can receive the information well and not just disregard it as someone who's belligerent on Facebook. Which there are a lot of those guys, right? Don't be that guy. So what committees are important to us? If your representative serves on the Health and Human Services Committee or the Public Health Committee, they're very important players in the legislative process because our bill, our medical marijuana bill, is going to be vetted by that committee first before it gets voted on by the full House of Representatives or the Senate. So they're especially important in getting to them early so they're prepared to pass the bill out of committee after we have our hearing. And that's medical side. Health and criminal jurisprudence and criminal justice are the committees where the civil penalties bill will go. So if your legislator serves on one of these committees, like Connie Burton, for example, Senator Burton, who's in this area, she is on the Criminal Justice Committee. She's also on the Health and Human Services Committee. So she is very, very important to bringing her along. She's a liberty-minded Republican, so this is something that I think that she's going to be inclined to support, but she needs to hear from more people from her district. Okay, so when you call, you're going to ask for the scheduler. If you're calling to schedule a meeting, you're going to call and ask for the scheduler. Let them know that you're a constituent, that you live in the district. It's important that they know that you are one of their voters. Typically, they'll ask you what you're calling to talk, what you're going to want to come in and talk about. Don't be afraid of it. You know, they might, if you say medical cannabis, they might not know what cannabis means. So you might have to say medical marijuana, and then you can take a note and say, hey, I need to educate them what the scientific term for marijuana is. Which is cannabis, right? And so help take that as a sign on just how much education that office needs, which sometimes is significant. So you're gonna let them know what you're calling about. Don't be afraid of the issue, right? You don't have to skirt around it. They may pause a bit, but just let them say the next word, right? Wait for them to blink. So you let them know that you want to come in and talk about medical marijuana or decriminalization, or if you want to talk about legalization. You know, generally that's not our focus because we have such higher priorities immediately, but it is important to have that conversation. If that's the issue you want to talk about, then definitely let them know in advance. So again, you'll say that, you know, I live in District 58, I've lived here all my life, or I've lived here for most of my life, and or whatever it is, if that's significant. And I'd like to I've never met with Representative so-and-so, Representative Senator Burton. I'd like to speak briefly about health or criminal justice related issues that matter, that relate to cannabis or marijuana, and I have some materials to bring by. So again, I'll be happy to send this to anybody that wants it. My cards are on the table. So it's not uncommon that you'd have to call again to follow up. Legislator staff, like many of us, drop the ball sometimes, and it's important to be persistent politely, and you may have to call a few times to follow up to actually schedule that meeting. And you may have to schedule out a few weeks in advance. Their schedules, especially now, are very, very busy. So you may have to schedule out for, you know, Wednesday 3 weeks from now. And that we have to be able to be flexible with that. Other ways to stay in touch, you can sign up for their email list. This is a really great way to find out where they're going to be. There are often events around town, receptions, or different political events that they'll send an email about being at because they want you to know that they're out and doing things in the district. And you can show up to them. A lot of times they have food, free food at these events. It's great. So you can show up and you can introduce yourself. So you'll want to go and you'll want to dress professionally, and you know, you might not get a ton of time with them, but it'll give you that personal contact. You can shake their hand, look them in the eye. You know, introduce yourself, maybe mention the issue if it's okay, it comes up naturally. And then, you know, ask me, can I follow up with your office with more information about this? They'll probably give you their card, and that's the beginning of a relationship. And we should be looking at all of this as building a relationship, because that's all politics is effective communication and relationship building. So consider it that way with all of this stuff. The local political parties have email lists that you can join, so you can find out what kind of events they're hosting. Often they bring legislators in for debates or forums or receptions. And so that's another way to find out where they're going to be. And to not only meet them, but also meet other community leaders. It's important to bring more people into our movement, find out who is favorable. If you can meet a county commissioner at one of these offices, it'd be great to get a county commissioner down from Capitol testifying in favor of one of these bills. And again, social media platforms are a great way to stay in touch and to give them valuable information. I should have updated this because 30 to 60 minutes is would be very generous. About why the legislature is in session. It's probably going to be more between 10 and 20 minutes. And you can get a lot of information in that time. And then again, you're looking at that as the beginning of a longer term relationship. So you'll want to introduce yourself. You want to let them know why this issue is important to you, what your personal experiences are, what motivated you to take the time out of your day and out of your life to come down and advocate for policy changes. You want to ask questions, find out how they feel, what concerns do you have? One of the concerns that comes up is about, if we reduce penalties, isn't it just going to incentivize young people to use marijuana? And we can tell them that actually in states that have reduced penalties or even outright legalized, teen use is not going up. In fact, in Colorado, it has gone down a bit, which basically is staying the same. It has not led to children using cannabis more than before. In fact, I think that ultimately, long term, we're going to see fewer kids using it. It's easier to get a bag of weed than it is to get beer, and that's because you have to have an ID to get beer. So ultimately, I think that we'll see that happening. Do a lot of listening. Legislators want to know how this affects them. So what do you want from me? Why are you here? We want you to co-author House Bill 81. Can we count on your vote for House Bill 81 when the House votes on it? We want to make sure that we have that hard ask for what we want them to do. When you're preparing a testimonial, you're going to want, if you have a personal story, a loved one or yourself who needs medical cannabis, if you've been arrested or know someone who has, you want to narrow it down to what the specific story is that you want to tell, and give reliable resources, backup information on that. You'll want to select your talking points. When you're thinking about your testimonial, think about it as like, those simple 5-paragraph essays that we did when we were in high school, right? Introduction, 3 points you want to make, and your conclusion. It's really that simple. We don't want to overthink it. This is just your personal experience, what the points are, getting it to them. Keeping it to one page means it's more likely to be read. So try to do that, including your salutation and your signature. You'll want to prepare 12 copies if you're bringing it to the Capitol for the hearing. You're going to print 12 copies, so each member of the committee has one and their staff. So you want to print all of that and the backup copies for whatever resources you have as well. If you're planning to testify verbally, which most people probably shouldn't, right? It's going to be a long day anyway with everyone who wants to testify. But if you don't have a real compelling personal story, you just support the cause, you can come and you can sign up in favor of the bill and allow the patients that have specific conditions or their caregivers to actually provide the verbal testimony to the committee. But if you are one of the ones that's going to testify, if you want to testify, it's only 3 minutes, which goes by really, really fast when you're up there. So you're going to want to prepare a consolidated version of your testimonial in order to deliver verbally. That is how you write a testimonial. Any questions? I've covered a lot of information. I've thrown a lot of things at you. So if you guys don't have any questions about, thank you, yes.
For the legislative lobby day that's coming up, are there specific talking points you want us to hit?
We do. We want to talk about, I have handouts and we didn't print them out today, but I'd be happy to send them to anybody who wants them. Some of the facts and figures and the myths and how to dispel them for civil penalties and for medical cannabis. So just to give a few examples, between 60 and 70,000 people are arrested every year in the state of Texas for possession alone. Not distribution, not trafficking, just the possession of this plant. So we want to bring that up. How much money does that end up costing? On average, it is about $735 million a year, and most of that is local costs. Our local jails, local law enforcement. So it's important to talk about those numbers, talk about the collateral consequences that come along with a conviction. With medical cannabis, bringing a study, talking about how, for me, why I got involved in all of this is on principle, that it is absolutely despicable that we would deprive patients of medicine. And when 62%, 180 9 million Americans have access, but Texans don't have the freedom to use a medicine that is safer, has a safer profile than aspirin. It is absolutely absurd. So, you know, when you're talking to conservatives, you're going to want to talk about a little bit more about maybe keeping government out of the doctor-patient relationship. You know, we have legislators that talk almost every day about repealing Obamacare because it's too much government in healthcare, and we want to be consistent on that. So getting government out of this, the doctor-patient relationship. And again, I'll be happy to send you the talking points document that we have that you can print out and bring with you to Lobby Day. We'll have them all printed out on Lobby Day as well. Yes, sir?
My question was, if you go down as a group and you have your talking points laid out, the individuals that sign up, can you actually assign your minutes to the group, to that group leader so we can have more minutes to talk, or how does that work out? Okay,
so you're talking about the hearing, when you go and sign up in favor of a bill? You cannot give your time to anybody else. City councils often do that. I know that Austin City Council allows you to do that up to 12 minutes so that one speaker can represent several others, but they don't do that at the Capitol. So what we could do though is have, you know, people come and stand behind the person, do a physical demonstration that this person speaking right now represents me. We wanted to respect your time, Chairman and committee, but this is representative of all of our comments. And, you know, we'll have an overflow room because guaranteed there are going to be enough people that we're going to have a separate room to do all of that. But that's a good way to do it. And then, of course, your written testimony as well. Yes, sir.
So when you go down there to talk to them, do you have, like, you say, like, I represent 50,000 people, or something, like, you know, what's the weight that you have as far as, you know, this volume of people? Or is it just, you know, DFW normal members, I represent this many people? Yeah.
You know, I would actually recommend not representing a larger group. I would recommend you just being there as an individual. I think that's more powerful. There'll be individual leaders from various organizations that will testify on behalf of their organization. But as individual members of DFW NORML, for example, or a member of MPP, we're going to encourage everyone to go as an individual. Because you as a father and an engineer is going to be far more powerful than just saying I'm a member of a group. Because in their mind, they're going to lump you in with that and set you aside. Instead, you're an individual, and they don't know how many people you represent, right? You going up there, I mean, how many people are in Texas? 27 million people? Then how many people actually came to testify? Well, so 27 million, we have 75% of them actually support medical cannabis, and then we have 25 people testifying. I mean, it's a ton of people, millions of people that these people are representing. So we'd have to do a breakdown of the numbers to say how many you would be representing, and we could do that.
I would think that would carry more weight.
Sure, you can throw that in there. I mean, at some point, especially with medical, throwing numbers around really doesn't affect it. It's the personal stories. It's how it felt to, you know, sit with your sister as she was going through chemotherapy and couldn't keep any food down. Meanwhile, in other states, people are being able to use it. Or like Barbara here was able to actually eat with her chemotherapy. Meanwhile, the other people that were there with her couldn't. So those kinds of personal stories are what advance it rather than the numbers. Although if we're talking about criminal justice stuff, the money saved is important. And sure, if you wanted to break down those percentages and the number of people we have testifying there to give yourself a number, then you could do that. Any other questions about the policy, about the process, about Lobby Day?
Would you guys have any because during public testimony, like you said, you only have maybe 5 days, sometimes even less than that, to get down to Austin to testify. We all have jobs. Are you guys going to be sending anything out, any events, like Facebook events, just to notify everybody, say, hey, look, you guys have 4 days, ask off for work, call in sick, do something, get down to the Capitol.
Yeah.
It's very important for public testimony many times.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys many of you are probably already on the DFW NORML email list, and they do send out action alerts as well. You can sign up for our email alert. You can follow our Facebook page. We're going to be letting everyone know about the hearings. Last legislative session for House Bill 507, which was the civil penalties bill. I shouldn't even mention the bill number because the bill number from last session doesn't matter anymore. For the civil penalties bill, we had over 200 people come and sign up in favor of the bill on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday afternoon. Came and signed up in favor of it. They didn't all testify, but they all signed up in favor of it. And so we were able to get the word out, get people signed up, and then they went back to work. So that was really helpful to be able to, and it's hard with you guys being so far away from the Capitol. But there was a proposal, Representative Stickland from around this area. He proposed an amendment to the rules that would have allowed you to sign up at your district office instead of having to go to the Capitol to sign up. You wouldn't have been able to testify from there, but you could sign up in favor of the bill, not testifying. And they squashed that. God forbid we have more people involved, right? Even if they're just signing their name. So that was rather frustrating, but Representative Stickland working for you on that one. Do you have a question? Oh, yes, ma'am, and then we'll come to you.
So the logistics of the lobby day, so
Yes.
you go down there on the bus, then you get 15 minutes with your senator, then you come back, so how does that still work out to like 10, 12 hours?
Yeah, sure. So you'll leave and we'll get there about 9:30 or 10 is when we're gonna be getting ready to start checking in. We'll give you all your materials. We'll do a brief training, and at about 11:30, between 11:30 and noon, we'll break up into groups by district. So we'll all break up into our Senate districts, and we'll go in groups to the different legislators' offices. But before that, we'll get a group picture. So you guys saw that.
We have a huge picture.
Yeah. So this was Lobby Day last year, which was glorious. I'd like to double that number this year. We had almost 300 people there. But so we break up into groups. So we had broken up into groups before, and then we all got together for the group photo. And then right after this, everyone ascended upon the Capitol. So we have a lunch break right after the training. And so we'll all go to lunch with our different groups, and then we will go to our different offices. And there are going to be different times. So we're not encouraging everyone to call and schedule a meeting. We're going to let legislators know and their staff know that between 1 and 3 p.m., people are going to be coming into your office to talk to you about this issue. And it is going to be brief, but the Capitol is really big. It's hard to get around. You might want to go check things out. There's lots of monuments. So we're giving time for people to not have to rush because it is a really big building.
So we're just meeting with our state senator, not our state rep?
And state representative, yes. So Senate districts are bigger. There are fewer senators, and so the chunks are bigger, the districts are. And there's multiple representatives within every Senate district. So we'll all go to our Senate districts, and then everyone who's in different representative districts will break up again and go to their legislator's office. And so it's likely that you'll be with a team. There's not really much of a chance from this area that you'll be alone because it's such a densely populated area. So then we'll do that, and then we'll head over to Schultz. And so if you're early, that's fine. They have a bar, and none of y'all are going to be driving, so that's good. So we'll go to Schultz to socialize afterwards, and then I think you guys are heading out about 7, maybe 6 or 7, something like that. So that's the schedule for the day. Yes, ma'am.
If you have like
several different areas where you've been affected by policies,
Yes.
different policies, should you choose just one to focus on?
I would recommend that. And so for Lobby Day, there's not going to be a whole lot of in-depth conversation going on because there's going to be a ton of people. But you're going to want to introduce yourself and tell them what kind of policies you want to see enacted. When you go in to schedule your meeting, you will want to stay focused. It's likely that you'll meet with a staff member. So it's likely to be a different staff member that handles health issues than the person that handles justice issues, criminal justice issues. So schedule one meeting to talk about medical cannabis, because in my mind, I'm imagining 2 tracks, right? 2 types of messaging. The ways you can be affected. It's either from an arrest or for medical purposes that you want to use it. And I guess sometimes those overlap. They do kind of overlap. But it's important to stay focused on what bill you're advocating for. So you can schedule 2 meetings. So you call 1 week and you schedule your meeting to talk about medical cannabis, and then 2 weeks later, call to schedule another meeting about the civil penalties bill.
So you would suggest to wait to schedule those meetings, not schedule them both at the same time, like, okay, I'd like to set up a meeting to talk to him or her about Senate Bill 81 or House Bill 81. And then I'd also like to set up an appointment at a later date to talk about Senate Bill 2.
I would recommend doing one and then the other. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Question. So for people that can't travel very often to Austin, can they set up phone conferences, or are there other ways for them to get appointments besides traveling to Austin?
Yeah, so we have district offices that are here locally that are staffed, but you can schedule a meeting, an in-person meeting here locally, which is a great way to do it. But if you can't travel outside of the house, then yeah, a phone call is going to be the best way to do that. And you can call and ask, is there a time that we can talk next week for 15 or 20 minutes about medical cannabis, about what my experience with that? Can I email you in advance with some information that we can go through over the phone? Absolutely, I think that's a great option. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the veterans on
Yes, sir.
Veterans that are close to it that might be hesitant, they go to active.
Go instead of them?
Or just go, like, just to give them more.
Absolutely, go with them. Absolutely. So it's veterans and loved ones. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. You could do that. I think so. Sure. I don't see why not. Heck yes, come on down. February 22nd, Veterans Lobby Day. Any other questions about policy, about process, about Lobby Day? I'm sorry? No. Okay. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Heather. Wow, that's a lot of information for a short period of time, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody feel like they're ready to go and do this on February 8th with me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody once again for coming. By our count, there's around 45 to 50 people here, which is not bad for a Saturday in January, so thank you very much. Hope you guys are all able to join us February 8th. Hope you're able to join us for our upcoming events. And if you have any questions, want to hang out and chat with us, we will be around. Otherwise, thank you for being members. Thank you for supporting marijuana policy in Texas. Herb's the word. Woo. Oh,